When I was 10 years old, my dad bought me this book, Creating Web Pages with HTML. I'm sure he was baffled at the time. He couldn't get me to do my math homework, or any homework for that matter. But I'd go home after school and spend hours teaching myself hypertext markup language just for fun. Not much has changed since then. I still love building web pages, but now I'm lucky enough to get to do that at 7 Shifts with the amazing team there, where I work as a principal engineer. As a principal engineer, I spend a lot of my time thinking about how we can ensure that every developer working in our code base has a fun experience. But what does a fun code base even look like? It can be hard to describe because it's different. It's different for different teams, different people, and different organizations. But what's a lot easier to talk about is what isn't fun. A Rails app that's stuck on Rails 4, even though the team knows they could take advantage of new things in Rails 5, 6, or 7. An application that is lost somewhere in the dangerous path between a monolith and microservices, with no hope of ever reaching the end. Or a code base where simple common tasks that used to take minutes now take hours or even days to complete. These things are bad, right? So as engineering leaders, we have a responsibility to ensure our code never ends up in this state. And if we fail here, then that's when we start to see things like big, risky rewrites, or we might see some of our most experienced folks leaving the company. Or we might see it as a loss of competitiveness because we're not as fast as we used to be. Unfortunately, successful code bases tend to follow a similar pattern. So this is basically the inverse of Vitor's graph. As code bases get bigger and more successful, they tend to just become less fun to work in. And this is where we find ourselves asking questions like, how did we get here? How did a group of smart, motivated people end up building a code base that we hate working in? This is especially important for us at 7 Shifts because our application is probably best described as a modular monolith, which means we have a small number of code bases that are long-lived. We can't just get rid of them or replace them. They're going to be around a long time. So over the last few years at 7 Shifts, we've tried our best to prove that we can have a code base that is both successful and fun to work in. We've learned a lot, made a lot of mistakes, and kind of ended up with this 3-step process. So the 3 steps we follow that help us ensure that our code bases not only continue to deliver a good experience for our developers working on them, but actually improve that experience over time are understand the developer experience, form a vision, and then iterate towards that vision. So how do you know if your code base is fun? There's a number of things we've tried here that work, but the simplest thing is to just ask people. Developers tend to be very happy to tell you about the parts of the code base they love, and even more willing to tell you about the parts they hate. A little under a year ago, we started sending out a survey to all our developers, and we send this survey out every 3 months. And we ask a number of questions, but one of the questions we ask is we ask developers to rate their experience working in each of our code bases on a scale from 1 to 5. The first time we ran this, what we found was there was a significant gap in the experience developers were having in our front-end code base versus our back-end code base. Consistently, developers were enjoying working in the front-end code base less than the back-end. And so this gave us a starting point. And we focused on improving the front-end experience over the next few quarters, and we saw a significant improvement. And hopefully, we'll continue to see this graph go up and to the right over time. Beyond asking folks to rate their experience on a scale, we also ask more open-ended questions, like what would make the experience better? Or what is preventing you from having a good experience in the code base? This tends to surface a ton of super useful pain points that developers are facing. OK, so now you have a list of problems. You might be tempted to just start solving them one at a time. What we found is that's not the best way to go. Instead, I'd encourage you to take a step back, look at these issues as a whole, see how they're connected, and take your context that you have as an engineering leader and use that to imagine a world where those problems no longer exist in your code base. What does the code base look like in that world? Once you figure that out, then you need to write it down. You need to write it down in a way that is easy to understand, memorable, and easily available to everyone. Here you should take Vitor's advice and over-communicate. This is an example of our front-end vision. And the actual vision is a full-page document that goes into more detail. But these are the 3 high-level things that we're focused on for our front end. And these will evolve over time. But this is the piece that's meant to be memorable and align everyone on. Once you have this, then you can start coming up with a list of projects that will bridge the gap from where you are today to that ideal world that you've just described. So now you know what you need to do. You have your list of projects. It's time to get to work. First thing that's critical is aligning on priority. Having multiple long-running developer experience projects ongoing at once is no fun for anyone. So pick one thing and have everyone work towards that until it's done. This doesn't mean you can't have different teams working on different projects at the same time. It does mean that every team should finish the first one before they move on. And this will reduce the risk of never-ending projects. Once you pick the top priority, you need to break that down into small tasks. The smaller, the better. And you need to make every team aware of which tasks they are responsible for. Some projects are well suited to having a single team work across the entire code base to make the improvements. For those types of projects, we've recently spun up a dedicated developer experience team. But there's a lot of projects where no single team has all the context or domain knowledge necessary to make changes across the entire application. These are the projects that tend to require a lot of coordination, and also, for that reason, tend to be the projects that never get done. This is what I often see when teams are stuck on an old version of a framework or a language, and they can't seem to ever get it updated. OK, so the last thing you need to do is to track progress. And this means not just tracking progress on the project as a whole, but also at a team level. It's important that every team is aware of how much work they have remaining towards a project, and other teams know that as well. We've solved this simply in the past with just a spreadsheet that tracks progress paired with our monthly all-hands meeting, where we share the numbers with everyone and make sure everyone understands where we're at. More recently, we've looked at automating this process, and we built an internal tool that helps us do this. And this tool, the goal is to reduce the burden on management for keeping this process going and ensuring that we can continue to do this without a lot of effort. And the tool is a simple web application that shows the projects in priority order, the work distributed by team, and the progress for each team. We pair this with simple CLI tools that we build for individual projects. And these tools allow teams to just run a simple command, and it will spit out all the work that their team is responsible for. So for example, if we're trying to upgrade a core framework, team can run this command, and it might spit out every file that that team is responsible for that is using deprecated code, for example. So it's early days for this yet, but we're hopeful that this will help us continue to improve the developer experience as we continue to scale. If this topic interests you, or even if it doesn't, please come chat with me later. I'd love to chat about it. And that's it. Thank you so much.